Hello. And for more on the Syria crisis and the case for or against an armed intervention against the regime of Bashar al-Assad following last week's chemical attack, I'm joined by Arnaud Danjean. He's the chair of the European Parliament's Defence and Security Committee. Mr. Danjean, welcome to the interview on France 24. Now, you're a military expert, a former member of France's intelligence agency, the DGSE. You also dealt with the Kosovo issue. You're a member of the European Parliament. Where is Europe in all this? We don't hear much from Catherine Ashton. Is there a clear European position regarding what needs to be done in Syria?
Well, you know, blaming the lack of EU visibility collectively is an easy game. We're playing it sometimes even at the European Parliament. But when it comes to a military intervention, and that's precisely the case where we are now, I think, fortunately or not, we come back to the nations and to the states. It's a purely national decision. And when we consider the options on the table right now regarding Syria, in Europe you have only two member states able to deliver.
France and the UK.
France and UK. So I'm not so shocked by the fact that EU as such is not at the front line. But you're right, EU should be more involved diplomatically. It should be more involved for maybe for the day after, since if there are bombings or not, anyway, there will be changes in the situation. So the EU should be ready to step in and to put a lot of energy and efforts for a diplomatic solution.
Now, at the beginning of this week, we heard increasing drumbeats of war coming from Washington, London and Paris. Today, we're being told that President Obama hasn't yet made his decision. David Cameron needs more time to secure the backing of his parliament. What's going on?
Well, to me, maybe you will be surprised, but it's quite logical. And even at the beginning of the week, when the momentum was gaining pace, I was very... I was more or less convinced that it would not be that easy and that quick. Why? For three main reasons. The first is each country involved in that has its own contingencies. We have seen that with the UK and the Parliament. We've seen that with the decision process in the US. So it's not that easy for each country to decide and to go for action. Second, we have a diplomatic process still going on through the UN, and I hardly believe that we could have strikes with UN inspections not completed.
So they're waiting for the results.
They're waiting for the results, as that was clearly and explicitly said by David Cameron.
But then why were they so quick to say we will intervene?
Because I think it's part of, I wouldn't call it a game, but I think it's part of the diplomatic pressure that is mounting on Syria, but also on Russia. And don't forget that next week we will have a summit, a G20 summit in St. Petersburg. And I hardly see the Western leaders coming to Putin, having bombed Syria without UN approval a few hours before. So I do believe that there is still a diplomatic opportunity in St. Petersburg next week to discuss thoroughly and quite decisively the issue. And part of the tactic could be to make the threat of strikes more credible, imminent, in order to make Russia move on the topic.
You're telling me that Western leaders want to twist Mr. Putin's arm and say, if you don't change your position, we will intervene.
We're ready to act. And you can see that if you have Western leaders coming to St. Petersburg and telling Putin it's the last chance, otherwise we will act. I don't think Putin will be very happy to end up like Helsin did in Kosovo '99, which is we don't care about Russia's position, we go for action, and that's not a good deal for Russia either. So there is maybe still some space for negotiations and for diplomatic solution. Anyway, I don't think anything can happen before the inspection is completed and before there is a full report to the UN about this report.
Now, assuming that the operation does go ahead, what are the military options that you would recommend as a military expert?
Well, to be honest, I wouldn't recommend any military action at all.
You're
in this
against
concept.
the idea
In
of
this case, yes.
armed intervention?
Because it's too. We are in a too volatile and fragile environment. We don't see the consequences. Maybe nothing will happen in terms of consequences if there are some strikes, very precise strikes, but it could also trigger a lot of reactions within the region, which is a very, very complex and volatile region. So I wouldn't recommend any military action.
But that
at this
means
point.
letting Mr. Assad go away with murder. And that's the point that Obama, Hollande and Cameron are making, that you ethically, morally, you cannot accept what is believed to have happened last week.
Well, precisely when it comes to chemical weapons. Because when it comes to classical weapons, more conventional weapons, then you have witnessed a lot of murders and massacres for the last 2 years and a half.
100,000 people are believed to have died.
So if we go for action, I do understand the argument that we go precisely for that, punitive action to punish, and that was clearly stated by François Hollande as such, we punish Assad for the use of chemical weapons. That is understandable, that is even somehow legitimate. But then the concern is a political one. We do strike, but what do we do the day after? And what do we do if it triggers a lot of reaction within the region through the Hezbollah, through other terroristic group, and that we do not have enough guarantee that if we strike, nothing, I would say, damaging will happen
and
afterwards.
so what do you do now?
I think you continue with a very tough, you can continue with a credible threat of action and then go for a diplomatic process. We all know that the solution will be a political one. And I do not have any example in mind where we have undertaken some strikes without a a diplomatic plan and political plan altogether. If we go for action, military action, without political strategy and without diplomatic solution for the day after, I think it will be very dangerous.
But then what EU diplomats will tell you is that Mr. Assad is not interested in a diplomatic solution, that they have attempted to reach a diplomatic solution.
I'm not that sure.
You don't believe that?
I think there is still space. If we come up with a UN report blaming clearly and explicitly Mr. Assad, then it might also change the Russian position. It will be harder for Russia to support 100% Mr. Assad if it's clearly stated by the UN.
Russia has been very stubborn so far, though.
Yeah, but a recognized body like the UN could have an impact. And also, unfortunately, I would say, so far, diplomatic efforts have not been successful either with the Syrian opposition, which is very divided. It has very different and divided sponsors, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Western countries. And let me remind you, when we talk about a Geneva II conference, peace conference, there is a lot of reluctance from the opposition side to engage because they simply don't want to talk to the regime. But I haven't seen any crisis where you don't put the enemy together to find a solution, or you have to go to war until the end. But I haven't heard about these options so far. We're talking about punitive, very precise, very limited strikes, and that does not bring a political solution.
Now, what you point out there as well is that there is a sort of a sense of ambiguity in the Western position, because clearly the Americans are not interested in toppling the regime. What they fear, of course, is chaos and a vacuum of power. However, though, do you believe that there can be reconciliation between Bashar al-Assad's regime and the opposition, given everything we've seen, everything we've heard?
Reconciliation is probably not the right word, but in any conflict of this nature, and we have witnessed conflict like this in the region, in the very region before, Lebanon. For 15 years, there was a terrible war in Lebanon. There were agreements at the end. At some point, there will be an agreement in Syria. When? In 6 months? In 2 weeks? In 3 years? Nobody can tell. The only thing I know is that striking now, the way we envisage it, will not bring this solution. And it might not even help to bring this solution closer. So I have my doubts.
What do you think, though, is likely to happen?
Well, there are two main scenarios, I would say. Either there is a strike, a limited one, then nobody knows about the consequences. Maybe the day after is nothing has happened, but it means that the war is going on. Or there could be terrible consequences in the region with some retaliation from Iran, from Hezbollah, or things like this. Or there are no strikes, but there is a new momentum for a diplomatic solution because of the threat of these strikes, Russia moves its position, for example. This is still a scenario. It's maybe not the most likely scenario, but it's still on the table.
Arnaud Danjean, Chair of the European Parliament's Defence and Security Committee, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of The Interview on France 24. Please stay with us for more news.